Happy Friday, Melonheads. My favorite time of the week. My Friday afternoon live stream. I hope you guys are well. I hope you guys are warm. After Winter Storm Elliot made one fine mess out of the whole country. My God, that was cold for Christmas Eve and Christmas. And wouldn't you know it, we were all on the brink of freezing to death. Isn't that comforting to know? And know, before all you people in the comments are like, oh, it's more FUD and everybody's so negative. No, this is not just more FUD. This is not just more clickbait, folks. I cannot stress this enough. Our power grid has reached such a pathetically unreliable state. After years of neglect, after decades of just forgetting how to build things, we just don't know how to build things anymore. Give a few examples of that. And then this green fantasy and the anti-nuclear activists and all of these horrible ideas have combined to form this stupidity Voltron that is our power grid. That's the sorry state of our grid. And as a former member of our power grid, or whatever you want to call it, I used to work in nuclear power. I used to be part of the grid. I can tell you it is not getting better. It is not getting better. It is getting worse. The ideas are getting worse, and so the grid is going to get worse. And, I had to cancel my live stream on Friday last week because the power kept flickering on and off here. And every time the power would flicker on, I mean, I have a backup generator. I have contingencies, but every time the power flickers, the internet would die. And, it takes about 10 minutes to come back up. You can't do a live stream under those circumstances. So it messed up my Friday live stream. I'm particularly bitter about that. So we're going to talk about this because this was all over the country. There were some isolated cases of rolling blackouts in more than one part of the country. Folks, this is bad. By the way, hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Just saw Dad in the comments there. It's good to see you guys. Love you guys. And, let's talk to my man, Mish. Let's look at a couple of things going on. We'll take a real quick trip through the markets before we start talking about this. Mish, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's much warmer here. It's now in the 40s, which is a 60-degree change, 60-degree change. So that's better. How's Denmark doing?
I did just see somebody said hi from Denmark. I believe unseasonably cold over in Europe.
Yeah.
We'll talk about Europe in just a minute. And yeah, man, 60 degrees to the warm side. I hear you. I mean, man, I went out there. My poor chickens. This is my first year having chickens, and I've been kind of like navigating and narrating my chicken experience on the channel here. And let me just tell you, chickens in the winter sucks. Chickens, God bless them, they keep making the eggs. Thank you, ladies, for the eggs, but it sucks when it is 3 degrees, -15 with the wind chill, and you have to go out there and make sure they have liquid water to drink because everything you put out there is frozen in an hour. That sucks, man. There's no other way about it. You put on gloves, it doesn't matter. The cold goes right through those gloves. I came inside. My hands were aching like you wouldn't believe. All right. I'm getting on a tangent. We're going back to the power grid. Let's take a quick trip through the indexes and through markets today. This is the final trading day of 2022, and good riddance. Good news, folks. We are now 30% of the way through this god-awful decade. There's only 70% of the 2020s remaining. What's the worst thing that could happen? Don't answer that. All right, the S&P 500 is down 28 points right now, about 0.73% at 3822. The Dow is down 197 or 0.59%. At one point today, it was down over 300. And the NASDAQ currently down 71. Looks like all the indexes are staging a little bit of a rally into close here. We still have about 40 minutes of trading left, so we'll see what's going on. Are we going to have that tax loss harvesting that I talked about in the video or not? Right now, there really hasn't been too much of that. Although all of December has just been grueling. The markets, no real big 1,000-point sell-offs in December, but a lot of these little few 100-point days all combined. December was just a terrible month for markets. Meanwhile, the U.S. dollar continues its decline, now at 103.57. And also, besides the Dixie, we've got bond yields are higher. That means bond prices are lower. And my good friend, the Happy Hawaiian, who I just finished editing part 3 of the interview with the Happy Hawaiian. That will be going up within a few hours, actually, after this live stream. I'll be posting that one. he just put out on Twitter that today is a nightmare day for the Fed. We have got stocks are down, the dollar is down, and bonds are down. Everything is down today. This is a worst case scenario for the Federal Reserve because usually one is down or two are down, the other is up. That would indicate money flowing from one sector to the other. That is not what's happening right now. Money is just going up in smoke. So that's something interesting to see virtually everything down. In the commodity space.
When we
Go ahead,
say
Mitch.
down in the bond market, that means yields are going up.
Yes. Thank you, Mitch, for that clarification. What's going on here? Am I losing my... Okay, no, I got it. For some reason, the StreamYard wasn't coming through. Can nobody see the charts here? Uh-oh.
I can see the charts.
Mitch, you can see the charts? Okay.
I can see the S&P 500 right now.
All right. Something's going on in my playback here on YouTube. I'm sorry, folks. So anyway, where were we? Oh, the bonds. Yes, thank you. The inverse relationship between bonds, yields, and prices. When you see green on this bond grid that I'm showing right now, that is yields heading higher. That is bond prices heading lower. Yeah, I'm seeing nothing on screen here. All right, folks. So with nothing on screen, this is going to complicate things. I don't know what's going on. I think it's probably my Wi-Fi is not doing so well. Oh, that's always fun. Thank you, infrastructure. So we're just going to have to narrate here. I'm just going to have to look at my screen and tell you guys what I'm seeing. So let's get on this story about the power grid. All right. Javier Blas put something out on Twitter not too long ago. He showed a map of Europe, and he says Berlin will welcome in the new year with temperatures of about 15 degrees Celsius, slashing heating demand. It's unseasonably warm in Europe right now. You throw in some strong winds right now, so windmills are cranking out power in Germany right now, and the result is the day-ahead electricity prices in Germany, in Berlin right now, are below zero. It's not the temperature, that's the price of electricity. They're below zero. Power prices in Europe and parts of Europe just went negative. Now, do you think that's a sign of a healthy energy market? When you hear European energy, do you think, a healthy power grid, everything's up to speed? Power prices went negative. They must have ample energy supply, right? No, not so much. They've got a ton of power when they don't need it. That's the problem. See, right now, the windmills are cranking out power, but it's not that cold, so the heating demand is low. Well, the windmills keep putting power on the grid because they are heavily subsidized. They get money from the government, whether they sell their power at a profit or not. And so the government makes their business profitable. And so they keep putting power onto the grid to the point where the power prices keep going lower and lower and lower. And the grid, remember, when there's too much power on the grid, that is just as bad as not enough power. You need to understand how grids operate. Grids like stability. They like load and they like capacity to be equal. When you get one or the other gets too far out of whack, the grid goes down. And so power prices go negative. You have to pay to send your power to the grid. The windmills don't care. They'll do it because they get the money from the government so long as they deliver that power to the grid. That is exactly what happens in Texas. And that's why the Texas power grid is such a nightmare. Besides the fact that Texas, the ERCOT grid, does not have many interconnections with the surrounding area. That's a standalone grid. But Texas is heavily reliant on wind. It's a big open space. There's not a lot of topography in Texas. So it's ideal for wind generation. You throw in those generous government subsidies, and there's just windmills as far as the eye can see in Texas. And they're profitable whether they make power that is needed or not. As long as they send that power to the grid, they're collecting money from the government. So they'll drive power prices negative. Well, if you're a power producer, say a nuclear plant or a coal plant in Texas, you can't afford power prices to go negative because you don't get those subsidies from the government. So you have to shut down when those prices go negative. And that means Texas has seen a loss of generating capacity because you can't do business when the competition is subsidized. Rigged markets fail. Well, that's what's going on in Europe right now. The power prices in Berlin are negative. And Javier Blas mentioned in his tweet just a few months ago in August, day-ahead power prices were 700 euros per megawatt hour. Now they're negative. And just to give you an idea, on an average day here in the States, power prices are probably anywhere from like $30 to $60 per megawatt hour on an average day here in the States. In Europe, they went as high as 700 in August, and now they're negative. How can you do business when the market fluctuates like that? You can't. This fantasy, these idiots making energy decisions around the world, not just here in the States, not just in Texas, in Europe too. They're creating conditions where power producers cannot do business, and so they're not doing business. And then you get things like power shortages. Well, let's talk a little bit about what happened this past week here in the States.
Hey, do you
All
want
right.
to come back on camera? You're back on camera now.
I'm back on camera. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share some of these articles. We will see if they come up. I got the iPad playing here to my left so I can see what's going on screen, but it's delayed by a few minutes. Yep, I'm back. Okay. So this is in the Daily Caller. All right. This one just came out today. Climate idealism meets the reality. Green energy failed to meet power demand when it was most needed. And before you jump down my throat, we are going to play fair today. We're going to take some cheap shots at fossil fuels as well. All right. So this is not going to be just hating on renewables, although there will be plenty of hating on renewables today. All right. I'm going to read you a little bit off of this. Green energy accounted for a small portion of electricity in New England and Texas as the regions narrowly avoided blackouts following winter storms. All right. Now, Texas, you had that big winter storm in 2021 in January. The New England power grid, the ISO-NE grid, has been on the brink of failure basically nonstop for the last 10 years. It's amazing there has not been a grid catastrophe in New England. People hear so much about renewables and think that they're a huge portion of the energy mix when they aren't, especially not in New England, according to Meredith Angwin, author of Shorting the Grid, which besides being the author of Shorting the Grid, Meredith Angwin is a wonderful human being and an incredibly nice lady. I had the privilege of meeting her and touring through European nuclear facilities way back in 2010. And she is one sharp lady. She has forgotten more about the power grid than most people could ever learn in a lifetime. And she has been sounding the warning for years about this very problem. Most of that has fallen on deaf ears, but she has been there every step of the way. The hidden fragility of our electric grid is the byline of that book. Fossil fuels are needed to keep us alive, and we see this when climate idealism meets the reality of the weather, according to Larry Behrens, communications director of Powering the Future. Renewable energy was unable to generate sufficient power to meet elevated energy demand during Christmas Eve snowstorms, forcing utilities in the northeastern U.S. and Texas to burn more fossil fuels to prevent outages. Now, that's a mildly put statement. All right. It's not that they were unable to generate sufficient power to meet energy demand. They just don't work, folks. All right. I don't know if you noticed, but this time of year, at least up here in Pennsylvania, the sun comes up around like 8 a.m. and it goes down around like 4:30. 8.5 hours of sunlight. Guess what? The other however many hours of the day, don't make me do math right now, those solar panels don't do jack. They do nothing when it's dark. And right now it's dark most of the day. And also those windmills, they spin, they have little bearings. Those bearings, when it's -11 with the wind chill, those bearings don't work so well, and those windmills don't actually turn so well. They freeze solid, and the windmills don't work so well when it's that cold out. So it's not that they were unable to generate sufficient power to meet elevated demand. They just didn't work. They're not there when we need them. They work great when it's warm and you don't need power. When people are not cranking up their heat and not at risk of freezing to death, they work great during those hours, and we're very grateful for that. Thanks. But when it's -11 in the wind, they don't work, and they're not there. The problem is when they drive power prices negative, they put out of business the other facilities that are reliable when it's cold, when it's -11. Well, now they're out of business. The windmills aren't working. Millions of people are SOL, and that is what happened on Christmas Eve. Although wind turbines, solar panels, and other forms of green energy have been consistently touted by the Biden administration as reliable alternatives to fossil fuel like coal and gas, renewables accounted for a small percentage of the grid's power output after snowstorms and a bomb cyclone nearly caused power outages in New England and Texas. But it was not just New England and Texas that were on the brink. Other places actually went past the brink. And I'm kind of surprised to see Texas and New England because, to be honest with you, Texas and New England are probably the most vulnerable sections of the grid in the country. And I'm surprised to see they fared so well. Other places, not so much. And I told you I was not just going to pick on renewables today. Here we go in Bloomberg. Fossil fuel power fell up to 68% as blackouts hit the U.S. South. Duke Energy and Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA, instituted blackouts. They're the latest example of failure in the U.S. power grid. Power plants that burn coal and natural gas to produce electricity had significant drops in generation as a winter storm hit the U.S. Southeast, forcing blackouts that left hundreds of thousands in the dark. Duke Energy and TVA cut power to homes and businesses during the holiday season as an extreme winter storm pummeled the region. Duke instituted rotating outages. In other words, they just, your neighborhood loses power, and then an hour later, we're going to take it out of this neighborhood, and they just move it around. It's nice of them to spread out that misery. On December 24th, that interrupted service to about 500,000 customers, while TVA, for the first time in its history, had rotating blackouts December 23rd and 24th. So the U.S. Southeast, Carolinas, Georgia, and TVA. And by the way, TVA is historically one of the most reliable sections of the grid. They didn't work in this cold. And, I have to say, it wasn't because of the renewables that they didn't work. It was actually because of the natural gas and because of the coal plants. And those facilities are typically way more reliable than renewables are. The average coal plant has something like a 70% capacity factor. Capacity factor takes the nameplate output of a power plant. Say it's a 500 megawatt power plant. And if it has a 70% capacity factor, that means it's only delivering 500 megawatts 70% of the time. Windmills and solar panels, by the way, have like 20 and 30% capacity factors. We'll get into that in a minute. Here we go. TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, apologizes for rolling blackouts and vows investigation. Well, that's very great. Thank you for investigating. We know what happened here. Your power plants didn't work. Your natural gas and your coal plants went down when it got too cold. There was peak demand and there was less output. Now, I just want to mention this bottom article, or this bottom paragraph. This article about TVA. The top source of electricity generation in Tennessee is nuclear power plants, which provide 47% of the state's electricity, while 20% comes from natural gas and 18% from coal. All three of TVA's nuclear plants, Browns Ferry in Alabama and Sequoia and Watts Bar in Tennessee, were generating power at 100% capacity during the cold snap, according to data from the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. All three of TVA's power plants ran at 100% power. I want to emphasize that. And by the way,
I
in
want
Buffalo,
to
New
point
York,
out that
go ahead, Mish.
yeah, I want to point out that as temperatures get colder, nuclear power plants actually get more efficient because of the liquid they use from off-site coming in is colder, and it actually draws a better vacuum on the condenser, which means the steam comes through faster, which turns the turbine more efficiently.
Yeah, you actually get a couple more megawatts out of a nuclear plant because of the cold cooling water pulls a vacuum. You get it just a little bit more juice when it gets super cold.
I used to be able to prove it on the board, but I dumped all that knowledge.
You're not going to start the ideal ranking cycle or anything? You're not going to make the... No?
No, we're not going to do ranking.
All right. Forgive the nerdism a little bit here, folks. You got a couple of nerds talking to you. I also want to mention in New York, right? We all heard about what happened in Buffalo. Here's Buffalo on the map. This is on Lake Ontario here. Buffalo, what's that, Lake Erie? Yeah, Buffalo's on Lake Erie. But in that whole area where there was entire feet of snow, you've got right here the R.E. Guinea nuclear power plant. It's one of the older and smaller of the power plants in the country. And you've also got the 9 Mile Point and James A. Fitzpatrick nuclear plants, all within a stone's throw of Buffalo. All three of those plants were running at 100% capacity through this storm. And that was with this lake effect snow happening, which if you've never been up there during lake effect snow, what basically happens is Mother Nature picks up the Great Lakes, freezes it, and then dumps it on you. It's a lot of fun. It actually sucks. I really hate the cold. All right, but these plants continued to operate at 100% capacity while all those windmills were frozen and all those solar panels were covered in snow. Notice I'm zeroing in on nuclear here a lot. Nuclear is the single most, nothing even comes close, the single most reliable form of electricity we have. Nuclear power in the United States is in decline right now. There's a couple of nuclear plants have been built in the Southeast. We had the VC Summer plant, I believe that's in South Carolina, and the Vogel plant in Georgia. All right, those plants have been built. The cost overruns and the scheduling delays on those plants were so immense that it basically canceled other projects all over the country. We have forgotten how to build things in this country. And unfortunately, we need to start building things again. And just to give you an idea of how bad it is, besides that, I think they bankrupted Westinghouse with the Vogel project and the VC Summer project. Took one of the biggest bankruptcies in history. In San Francisco, they're building a net under the Golden Gate Bridge to catch jumpers. Jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge is a real problem. We have a mental health crisis in this country, I understand. So they're building this safety net to catch jumpers off of the Golden Gate Bridge. It has now taken longer and cost more money to put up this net than the whole freaking bridge cost in the first place. That is how bad Americans are now at building things. We really suck at building stuff. We better figure it out soon. So we're going to have to start building and making stuff again soon if we're going to make it. And I want to talk a little bit because I get these questions a lot on this channel. I get asked about small modular reactors. And, I've heard about TerraPower, or I've heard about thorium, or I've heard about all these other possible reactors. And I used to follow this stuff very closely about 14, 15 years ago when all of these technologies were at basically the exact same stage of development. And the problem back then was not the technology. The problem back then was not the science. The problem was the regulators. And that's why I want to read you this story. This is in Herald.net. Why progress on small modular nuclear plants is slow. There's bipartisan agreement to develop the technology, but a federal regulator is adding red tape. And just so you know, a small modular reactor, instead of these giant 1,000-megawatt pig reactors that we have, right? Our nuclear fleet in the U.S., most of them were built 50 years ago. They're very big reactors, like 1,000 megawatts. Small modular reactors are basically these cookie cutter, built within a factory reactors that might be 25 megawatts or 50 megawatts or even 100 megawatts. And they're supposed to be a little more nimble. You can build them quicker and more efficiently, and you can put them in smaller locations on the grid. Maybe you don't need to put them near a big city. You can put them near a smaller town. And it's easier to have this distributed generation versus these single massive generating centers.
I would also like to point out the first modular reactor was built in the 1950s by the Army.
Yeah, and you could also argue that the Navy has been operating small modular reactors for decades, right?
We produce a little more than 25 megawatts.
A little bit more, yeah. Well, I don't know. Submarine, how many? We probably can't say, but I don't think a submarine is putting out much more than 50 megawatts. I could be wrong. Pushing a carrier through the water. Yeah.
A carrier is different. Carrier is a totally different world. That would not in any way, shape, or form be considered a small modular reactor.
Right.
The submarines probably.
We have experience though. And here's what I want to talk about on that. This is what really got me. And if you want to know why nuclear power is in decline, even though we desperately need it, our grid so desperately needs it, we're still losing nuclear plants. We're shutting down nuclear plants faster than we're building them. It's not even close. I mean, the only reason I'm in Pennsylvania is because the Oyster Creek nuclear power plant that my wife and I both worked at shut down in 2018. It was a perfectly good plant. Could have run for 20 more years. But somebody decided we killed too many bluefish, which sells for 35 cents a pound at the fish market across the bay, but forget about that. In January 2019, President Trump signed the Nuclear Energy Innovation and Modernization Act, or NEMA, which was spearheaded by Senator John Barrasso from Wyoming and co-sponsored by more than half a dozen Democrats. This was a bipartisan bill. The bill passed the Senate on a voice vote and cleared the House by an overwhelming margin of 361 to 10. All right, so AOC and her frat sisters are like the only people in the world that are opposed to this stuff. There's like unanimous agreement in Congress on this. I mean, think about that. They can't unanimously agree on what day it is, these people. And 361 to 10, this bill passed. Among the law's provisions is one that directs the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to create a feasible path for the licensing of modular reactors. As Senator Sheldon Whitehouse said at the time the intention was to give our nuclear regulator the flexibility it needs to bring new, safe reactors online to produce carbon-free energy. Sounds like a great idea. We want to streamline the regulation. Fast forward almost 4 years later, and the NRC still hasn't done anything. Instead of generating a new, simpler rule that will make reactor construction possible, on September 30th, it released a gargantuan 1,252-page draft rule that experts say is even more burdensome than the older regulations. As the Breakthrough Institute explains, the NRC essentially copied and pasted the older prescriptive rules and then added new ones. Keep in mind, the purpose of the law was to streamline the regulations. And they basically said, here's all the old regulations, and here's a bunch of new ones. There's your streamlined regulatory process. In particular, it stuck with the as low as reasonably achievable, otherwise known as a LARA principle, standard for radiation, which makes it economically impossible for a nuclear reactor to compete with fossil fuels.
I bet you my lifetime's a lot higher than yours.
No, it isn't. I've had 2 thyroid ablations.
Oh, never mind.
What Mish is talking about when Mish said, I bet you my lifetime is higher than yours. He's talking about his radiation dose exposure. And I could tell you the radiation exposure that the average nuclear worker in the commercial industry gets is incredibly low. All right. I never felt even the slightest bit unsafe in a radiological environment when I worked in nuclear power. I walked past the dry cask storage facilities, these bunkers where we stored the nuclear fuel rods, day in and day out on my way to work every day. And I wore a radiation dosimeter around my neck, and I never picked up any measurable dose doing that. All right. So I'm sure you got more dose because carriers or ships, weight is a consideration and insulation is heavy. I'm sure you got some dose.
I'm north of 800.
North of 800? What's that? Rem?
That's in millirem.
Millirem? Well, I can tell you most of the radiation dose I've received in my life, well, the average person, most of your radiation dose comes from the sun or from the ground. All right? Radon gas is from decay of radiological isotopes that are in the ground naturally occurring, and radon gas filters up through the ground. You're constantly being hit with radiation from that. You're constantly getting radiation from the sun. You get radiation
Hold on. Here's
from
what's even
marble.
better. That radon is coming from a daughter product of uranium decaying in their concrete.
Yep. Yeah. Senators, when they give anti-nuclear speeches, from the U.S. Senate chamber, they're standing next to a marble statue. Fun fact, they're probably getting more radiation dose from that marble statue emitting radon gas than they are from any of the commercial nuclear plants operating in the country. All right. Now, I also got a ton of radiation dose from medical, and that's another source where people actually get a lot of radiation, way more than commercial nuclear plants or the naval reactors. I received 2 thyroid ablations. I have a condition called Graves' disease. We're learning a lot about Jack today. Graves' disease causes an overactive thyroid, and so they gave me an ablation treatment. I had this treatment twice because the first one wasn't effective enough, where they take a little pill full of iodine 131, which is a radioactive isotope of iodine. It's made by nuclear fission. It's the same iodine that is made in nuclear reactors. And the doctor
Also
walks
a
in.
decay product of uranium.
Yep. Doctor walks in with the pill, and he puts it on the table in front of you, and then he jumps back. Because that doctor gets more radiation dose doing what he does for a living than I did working at the nuclear plant. And, it's funny because I talked about, I won't tell that story. Never mind. So I had to swallow that iodine pill, and it goes right to your thyroid gland. Iodine gets in your blood, and it concentrates in your thyroid, and it just burned away my thyroid gland. And I was actually so radioactive from that treatment that I was not allowed to go into work at the nuclear plant for 70 days, twice. Each time I had that facility, I was so radioactive for 70 days that I couldn't get into the nuclear plant. I would have set off the radiation alarms from the parking lot. That's how sensitive the radiological controls around nuclear plants are. Now, I was allowed to walk right out the front door of the hospital into public. Totally, radiation was just emanating from my neck. When I sweat, radioactive particles would come out, right? When you get medical isotope treatments, it's in you and you're just radiating and everybody's getting dose from you. I was allowed to walk out among the public, radioactive Jack, and I wasn't radioactive because of the nuclear plant where I worked. I was radioactive because of what the doctor just gave me to improve my health. All right, now that they're not picketing out in front of the hospital. Save our babies from all the radiation. Don't let these radioactive patients walk. What about our air? What about our water? Rabble, rabble, rabble. Throwing horse manure at executives at public information sessions. Smearing ketchup on paintings in protest. Even though there's more radiation walking out the front door of every hospital in the country than there is escaping the perimeter of commercial nuclear power plants. But like everything, the idiots in this country dictate energy policy. The Gretas, the pink hair committee chair, the ketchup being smeared on the paintings. Those are the people who are making these decisions. It is not us. And that's why the Nuclear Regulatory Commission came back with an additional 1,200 pages of regulations that was their streamlined process. It was 1,200 pages longer. But no, the hospitals are fine. You just swallow the radiation and walk out. And I'm not saying like they shouldn't have let me walk out. All right. Like there's so much fear of radiation because the media is partly to blame with their sensationalist BS and Hollywood is partly to blame, but also, it's willful ignorance. This information is readily available. Anybody can go learn it. Most people just choose not to. It's easier to be afraid. And our fear of radiation right now is causing more harm than radiation has ever caused. Because hundreds of people died in that blackout in Texas. And I suspect that by the time they're done thawing out the cars and digging people out, they'll find that hundreds of people died in upstate New York. And a lot more people could have died in the Southeast and in Tennessee as these power grids are failing. And the one technology that is ideally suited to balance our grid, nuclear power, it is 90% capacity factor. And it's actually more efficient. It generates more electric when it gets cold. That is the one technology that is in decline right now in the U.S. We're building more natural gas. We're building more wind. We're building more solar. Coal is on its way out also. But nuclear is in decline. And, yeah. So.
You have a super chat a while ago?
Oh, I did. Sorry, man. I was on my soapbox.
No, man, you were rolling. I'm not going to interrupt.
Yeah. Oh, hey, Dan. Dan Hedin says NuScale has been approved to build reactors in Idaho in 2029 and 2030. Dan, I think you're probably talking about INL or Idaho National Labs, which is I think INL is run by the DOE, the Department of Energy. That is not a commercial reactor. Could be mistaken on this. Again, I don't follow this as close as I used to, but this is not a commercially operating, sending power to the grid reactor. This is an experimental test reactor being built at a national lab. There's a lot of projects like that at various stages of development. But as far as an actual commercially operating plant putting juice on the grid, we're still a long way away from that. And our regulators were ordered to make that easier, and they made it harder. It might be a gross oversimplification, but that's the way it is. And it's fear of radiation. There's no other way to put it. It is just fear of radiation. And look, there's a very powerful anti-nuclear industry. I'll use the term industry because there's a lot of people who make their living scaring people about nuclear power. One of my first experiences in nuclear power, I had just joined the plant and I was meeting some of the other engineers, and there was this little get-together happening at the Ocean County Library held by the Ocean County League of Women Voters, where they had Christy Brinkley. Remember the girl in the Ferrari from National Lampoon's Vacation? Yeah, her. Christy Brinkley, Alec Baldwin, and some lawyer named Richard Webster. That was their panel of experts on nuclear power. And they got together, and it was about opposing the continued operation of the plant that I was working at, Oyster Creek. It was the oldest operating plant in the country at the time. It's now shut down and decommissioned. They're tearing it down. Breaks my heart to see a perfectly good reactor being torn to pieces, but that's what they're doing to it. And there was a whole, that room was, half the room was full of power plant employees who went there for the entertainment value of the BS that they were reciting. It was really hilarious. Some of the stuff they're just so stupid. I don't know how to, they're just so stupid. I could spend more time and put more thought into describing their words and everything, but I'm just gonna say stupid and move on. They're just stupid.
Yeah.
An actor, a lawyer, and a supermodel was the panel of experts on nuclear power. And any of the plant employees who offered any kind of technical knowledge or anything, shared any experience, were automatically dismissed as paid corporate shills. Isn't that convenient when you can hire 3 professional BS artists to come in and make up anti-scientific crap, and then anybody who knows better can be arbitrarily and summarily dismissed as a paid shill? How freaking convenient. And that's why our grid is the way it is. It's because of Alec Baldwin, and Christy Brinkley, and Greta, and the pink hair committee chair, and the ketchup popsicles on the Van Goghs. Those are the people who are in charge, folks. That's why your power bills are so high. And that's why you lost power on Christmas Eve. That's why we didn't have our live stream last Friday. And this is getting worse. I mean, look at every proposed energy solution that has been offered up for the last several years. It is nothing but more of this prepackaged green fantasy nonsense. More wind and more solar. You could build 1 million more windmills and it would do nothing to help us last week. It would have done nothing last week. They all would have been frozen altogether. And, you know, most of the grid operators, they'll reassure you, no, we're safe, we're fine. If we experience a period of peak load, all we can do is use some of our interconnections and borrow power from surrounding areas. Well, that didn't work during this power outage.
At
a penalty, yep. But that didn't work because none of the surrounding power grids were willing to sell it. PJM wasn't going to send power to ISO New England because PJM didn't have power to spare. They were in the same conditions. And Duke Energy down south, they couldn't buy power from PJM either. And TVA couldn't send it to Texas. And Texas couldn't send. The interconnections were worthless because everybody was freezing. There was no extra power anywhere.
Off the national grid, right?
They're mostly off. Texas has a few interconnections, but they're too few to make a difference. That's one of the things that supposedly they improved after 2021 was they were going to increase their interconnectivity with the neighboring surrounding grids. But that didn't do anything this time around because nobody had any power to spare. It didn't matter how many interconnections you had, you couldn't get it. Nobody was willing to sell it. So thank you, Dan, for the super chat and the support of the channel. And yes, I am aware of the new scale reactor. And my good friend Mike Binder from Robin RC Models, he brought up something similar, a similar technology on one of our Patreon Zoom calls 2 weeks ago. The technology is amazing. Some of these reactors are fantastic. They're cheaper. They're safer. And when I say safer, that's not to imply the current ones are unsafe. The current ones have a near perfect safety record. And no power source has a perfect safety record. People die all the time generating power. Gas tanks blow up. Houses blow up from natural gas. There's fires on oil rigs. People fall off a roof surfacing solar panels. Every single power source has a safety footprint. Nuclear's is better than all of them. Even when you factor in 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima and its death toll of 0. Not one person died from the radiation at Fukushima. But for all the hoopla and everything that happened in the press after that, well, the rest is history. I got my man Steve is here. Where are you, Steve? Coming down. Steve Woida says, didn't the proliferation of coal plants in the 70s and 90s occur mainly because of political opposition to nuclear? Maybe not in the 70s and the 80s, because in the 70s, there was still a lot of nuclear plants being built. Most of the plants in the U.S. Were built 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I know 3 Mile Island was kind of the turning point. After TMI, the anti-nuclear industry really picked up steam, and that's when a lot of projects got canceled. Some were at various stages of completion that they finished those off. Another one like Watts Bar, one of the plants in Tennessee, that was like half finished for like 30 years before they finally got the funding and the approval to go finish that one. So it may have been in the 90s.
A lot of this policy is 80s and 90s. A lot of this policy was driven from 3 Mile Island. Remember? That happened right then. And then we had Chernobyl in the 90s. So everybody got kind of turned off from these two accidents. Well, then you add Fukushima, and I challenge the average person to name more than 3 accidents with nuclear power when you can name thousands of accidents of blown up gasoline factories, right?
I guarantee you
The
today
average person
alone.
can't.
Pause for a second. Today alone, Mish, I'm going to go out on a limb and say there were over 100 accidents involving traditional fossil fuels, natural gas, and gasoline and oil. There were probably today alone more than 100 accidents that killed more people than Fukushima did, than 3 Mile Island did. Every day, they don't even make news. Maybe they make local headlines. But everybody's afraid of nuclear. You have got a flammable explosive gas being piped through the walls of your house while you sleep. And you don't go to bed fearing that. And I don't go to bed fearing that. But I can tell you that is a bigger threat to your well being than the nuclear plant that's a few miles from my house. I say that unapologetically, 100% scientifically accurate. And yet most people are afraid of the nukes. And nuclear is right now it is the only technology that has any chance of saving the U.S. from these cold spells. I mean, this is a new thing since our grid became so reliant on natural gas. We used to be more reliant on coal. Now we're more reliant on natural gas. And that's why during the cold weather, we're so vulnerable. The pipelines freezing is something new, but also because we also use the natural gas for heat, and you just can't push any more gas through the same pipes. So we are very vulnerable, and this is a new phenomenon over the last 10, 15 years since the fracking boom is when this is developed. Our grid is more vulnerable than it has ever been, and it's getting worse. It is not getting better. Our policy decisions are making it worse, and the only solution available to us, nuclear power, is further away today from implementation than it was a few years ago. And the NRC is one of the hindrances.
Well, I got asked a question about the waste, and I think the waste is important to talk about here. They have the science down on waste now that the waste is in the matter of kilograms. It's not the thousands of pounds that it was in the 80s, right? So we're down to what they do is they take I won't really go into how, but they take all the fission products out and just leave the uranium back in there, change out the poisons, and then they put the fuel back in, right? So they
now, when you say
refurb
poisons, I want to specify. When you say poisons, you're talking about neutron poisons, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is when engineers talk, and you got to be careful. All right. Yes, there is toxicity in nuclear waste, but when Mish says poisons, he's talking about materials that gobble up neutrons. That's referred to as a poison.
It's a poison inside of a control rod helps us, not the control rod, the fuel rod helps us manage the power rate of change.
Now, here's the thing with the waste. Let's talk about the waste, first of all. All right. Nuclear power is the only industry that is responsible for its waste byproducts. I mean, absolutely responsible. Even solar panels, right? Go look at some of these rare earth mines in China where the materials for solar panels have been mined and what they look out. They are some of the most toxic environments in the world. All right. And go look at some of these landfills where they're putting these windmill blades right now, these massive 300-foot long wind turbine blades that are useless after 15 years. They can't be recycled. There's no point. They just bury them. Some of the biggest landfills the world has ever seen will be full of windmill blades, right? Nuclear is the only energy source that takes 100% responsibility for its byproducts. Now imagine a coal plant, or no, imagine your car, all right? Imagine if you have this balloon, all right, and it's a super balloon. It can just stretch forever without popping. But you have to capture all of the exhaust that comes out of your car when you drive it. You can't just send it into the atmosphere like the coal, the natural gas, and the oil does, and the gasoline does. Imagine this balloon is on your exhaust pipe, and it's just getting bigger and bigger as you drive around. Now imagine you drive your car nonstop, 24/7 for 2 years. How big is that balloon going to be? That's what nuclear does. Nuclear, every single ounce of nuclear fuel that has ever been used at a commercial operating plant in the United States is still at that plant. We send nothing up into the atmosphere, nothing into the waterways. Every single ounce of that nuclear fuel is still there. It's either in a fuel pool in the reactor itself or in these dry cask storage facilities on the grounds. They're about the size of a tennis court, these storage facilities. Now, the average nuclear fuel rod is about 12 feet long. All right, it's about 4 inches by 4 inch square. It's about 12 feet long. And most reactors have, oh man, the core engineers. Declan, I know you're out there right now. Declan's making fun of me, rolling his eyes. I can't remember how many fuel bundles were in our core. 500 to 700 fuel bundles, something like that.
Man, I remember to this day how many rods and fuel.
I remember I was a control rod guy. I had 137 control rods that I was responsible for. The fuel rods, I didn't.
I was an operator.
There's perimeter fuel rods that had no control rods between them.
I was an operator.
We're getting nukey here. All right. But at the end of a power cycle, most commercial plants in the country, they replace 1/3 of their fuel every 2 years. All right. So imagine you drive your car nonstop, 24/7 for 2 years, and you've only gone through 1/3 of a tank of gas. That's what nuclear reactors do. And we capture all of our exhaust. How big is that balloon coming out of the back of your car after all that time? All right. So we replace 1/3 of our fuel. Now that fuel, I don't want to understate that. That stuff is lethal. All right. Now they act like, what if terrorists were to get their hands on it? It would be kind of funny to watch them try. Not funny, but like you could put one of these rods down and be like, okay, terrorist, go grab it. And he wouldn't even get a foot before he just dropped dead from handling the stuff like it. All right. So I don't want to understate just how lethal used nuclear fuel is. All right. But it is manageable because it is an incredibly small quantity of it. And that fuel rod that comes out of the core, that 12-foot long, 4-inch by 4-inch fuel rod, it's still got about 98% of the fissile uranium in it, of the usable material in it. It's only actually consumed a small percentage of the uranium in the rod, and it's actually made plutonium while it was in there. So there is plenty of fuel still in there. We can recycle that fuel. We can take out the really toxic, really nasty stuff. And now the amount of waste, instead of being 12 feet long, it's about the size of a beer can. So currently, right now, the average family of 4, if you were to get 100% of your energy from nuclear power, that's all the energy in your lifetime, a family of 4, the amount of waste generated would be about the size of my coffee mug. That is all of the exhaust products, all of the everything. If we did it from nuclear, it'd be about the size of my mug right now. All right. Now, if we were to recycle our nuclear fuel, which we're not allowed to do in the United States, the government doesn't let us do it. If we were to recycle our nuclear fuel, instead of all of the nuclear waste from your entire lifetime of your family being about the size of my mug, it would be about the size of the tip of your thumb. That's if we were able to recycle nuclear fuel. That is how energy dense nuclear power is. We don't allow ourselves to recycle nuclear fuel because Jimmy Carter was afraid of nuclear weapons proliferation. Well, guess what? All the people he didn't want to get nuclear weapons ended up getting nuclear weapons anyway. So it's an outdated policy and it's irrelevant now, but we still haven't changed that stupid policy. Now, besides all that, everybody who gets power from a nuclear reactor, there was the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. I think it was passed in 1983. There is a 1/10 of 1 cent for every kilowatt hour of electricity that you buy from a nuclear plant goes into the Nuclear Waste Fund. It's a fund that was set up from the government. Every power plant in the country pays into it, and they pay for every kilowatt hour they sell. They have to pay into this. And they have paid over the decades billions of dollars into this fund. And with that money, they built the Yucca Mountain facility. Yucca Mountain is a it's an inactive, extinct volcano in Nevada. And they built this giant tunnel underneath Yucca Mountain. They spent billions of dollars to do it. And the idea was to take all of the spent nuclear fuel rods from America's 100 plus commercial reactors at the time, plus all of the spent nuclear fuel rods that Mish and his crew and the Navy have produced over the years. And they were going to put it under this mountain in the desert where nobody lives. And a former senator by the name of Harry Reid built his entire career around making sure Yucca Mountain never happened. So we spent the money, we built it, and it's sitting there. We're not allowed to use it. And Harry Reid managed to get his little buddy, guy by the name of Gregory Jasko, former chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, he managed to get him appointed to the NRC. And, well, he killed Yucca Mountain on day one.
But it was featured in the Godzilla movie.
Yes, Muto. Muto was in there. Are you hearing that clicking noise when I talk too, Mish?
It's coming from you.
It's coming from me? All right, I don't know what's causing that.
It's sounding like internet issues.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, since I'm making this weird clicking noise like the Predator, we're probably going to wrap it up there. Let's take one last trip through the indexes here. I've been going for a while. I appreciate you guys listening to my rant about power, but, man, it was cold. I hate cold, and I hate energy policy. So this was pretty much combined. All right, markets are closed for 2022. Good riddance. We had a nice rally into the close. The S&P 500 ended up closing down 10 points, or 0.28%. The Dow closed down 73 points, or 0.22% at 33,147. The NASDAQ closed down 11 points, or 0.1%, all just barely negative for the day. So the 2020s, or no, not the 2020s, 2022 is now behind us. So good riddance to 2022. It was one of the worst years in the stock market in a long time. 2023 probably not going to be much better. Got 7 years left in this decade, folks. Let's make the best of it. What's next on our 2020s bingo? Mish, take a guess.
2020 or 22 or 2023? What are we talking here?
2020s bingo. What is the next calamity to strike the race? We've got, pretty World War III is pretty much underway. We've had murder hornets. We've had the plague. We've had the frigid ice storm. I'm going to go with a meteor carrying the seeds of a mutant alien parasite. That'll be 2023.
I would like to say, no, I don't play the piano. This is actually a filter, so you don't see where I am. But two, I played violin, actually. Full disclosure, I played the violin for 5 years.
He does. Every time we talk, always complaining. He never stops.
I think the next thing that's going to happen here is that, we have another weather storm coming through. That's supposed to be not as cold, but much more moisture in it. And I think that we didn't really talk about the 10-year too much, but the 10-year has been going up for a while. And Steve said Yellowstone erupts. So I think the next thing we're going to see is actually a disclosure sometime in the next 2 weeks from SBF, some other people that were just arrested. There's a lot of things that are about to come out here in the next week, and I think that's actually what's going to push it. So I don't know. Binance collapses in the next 30 days.
All right, it's a little less Sci-Fi Channel, but I'll give you more plausible than my meteor. Real quick, I just want to mention something real quick. KD made a comment saying nuke war for 2020's bingo. Let's hope not. But look, we spent a lot of time talking about nuclear power on this stream, and I just want to mention one thing. There was a program called Megatons to Megawatts. It ended in 2013, but it was an agreement that we cut with the Russians after the collapse of the Soviet Union, where for several decades, 50% of the uranium that went into the United States commercial nuclear reactors was actually material taken out of nuclear warheads from the former Soviet Union. So for several decades, we were literally powering our cities with the same bombs that were built to destroy them. All right, so that's one of those things that's like, okay, maybe there's a chance for us. Maybe we're not all miserable, rotten, awful beings. Maybe we can do this still. All right, so we've kind of lost our way, right? Obviously, we're not getting along with the Russians as well as we were back when we were converting their bombs into our fuel to power our cities with clean, safe energy. But we can be again. So this is me being optimistic. Can you tell?
Well, if you want to talk about legitimate things that could happen, I actually agree with several people in the earthquake/volcano realm. If you look around the ring of fire here this year, they've had a record number of eruptions. And so I think there's some plate tectonics activity that's going to happen in the next year. Good luck, everybody.
Plate tectonics is not on my 2020s bingo. And EC 660, yes, sir. This was live. Again, right above my head there. See it there? Live. That's it. Dead giveaway, man. Come on, EC. Thank you very much, brother, for the super chat and the support of the channel. Thank you guys for putting up with the continuing tech issues. I don't know what the clicking was. There's a predator in my office, maybe. And, I don't know why my charts weren't showing before. So I apologize for all of that stuff. Guys, I want you to have an awesome and safe, happy new year. No DDs or no drinking and driving. Use a DD, folks. All right. A lot of stories. I was watching Greg Manarino's channel this morning. Greg is an awesome guy, and he told a story about somebody he lost to a drunk driver on New Year's Eve and how he has a hard time celebrating New Year's Eve because of that tragedy. So don't be one of those. Don't cause one of those. Be safe this weekend, but have an awesome time anyway. And Mish has his hand up. Go ahead, Mish.
Do not unintentionally either add nor take away from the population.
Yes. Do not. Do not unintentionally. I can tell you, the people watching this channel, we need to be the ones procreating, everybody. So, hey, have a good time this weekend. Go forth and multiply. My magnificent Austrian free market friends, I want you guys to have an awesome, happy new year. 7 years left in this decade. We will get through it every step of the way here on Nobody Special Finance. Thank you to Mish. Thank you to all my blue wrenches for keeping things neat and tidy in the chat. Thank you very much, Mom and Dad, for everything. Thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys rock, and you preserve the independence of the channel. And until next time, live small and dream big.